Hey guys, it's Rich with your Monday Spot on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we're talking about curses. This week's topic comes from Christmas Mouse, who writes, Witches, Wiccans, Pagans, and their ethics, to bless and blast. If being a witch is about spells, then why is it against the Rede to curse/hex? Didn't Crowley blast? I know one priestess who has blasted so many times that, let's just say, it got real. Very real. Not all witches and pagans believe in the Rede. So I want to start with the last part first and the first part last, I think, is probably the flow that this is going to go. So first off, true, not all pagans believe in the Rede. And that's something to keep in mind whenever you're talking about whether or not you should curse, hex, or in other terms, blast somebody, taking the corrective action that is sometimes needed for an individual to, get their crap together. So I think that is something important to keep in mind, first off. Another thing that I want to draw attention to is, yes, Crowley did blast. Crowley did do some things that, if he were a Wiccan, probably would not be looked upon nicely. And, there's some things in Crowley's past that I don't even look on lightly or in a good light. And I look at him and I'm like, yeah, not exactly somebody I'd want to, sit there and be buddy-buddy with. Certainly to learn things, because he had an incredible mind in and of himself, but overall, probably not somebody that I'm going to sit around and, have a few drinks with and party around with. So, yeah, Crowley did do that. Keep in mind that Crowley, died in the 1930s, I believe. I could totally be wrong on the dates, and I have my phone here. I should have looked that up. But the Wiccan Rede wasn't officially developed until 1964, I believe it is. So, I mean, you have a huge gap of time that this was in development. And as much as we want to say, as Wiccans would like to say that the practice of Wicca is ancient and it's a secret ancient form that has been around for thousands of years, it's just not true in the sense that we know of Wicca today. The pagan practices that it's stemmed from certainly are older than what Wicca itself is, certain practices and whatnot, but Wicca as a practice itself, as a branch of paganism, has not been around entirely that long. So that's something that we have to keep in mind whenever we're talking about the Wiccan Rede, is even the Rede hasn't been around that long. And I'm sorry, I'm at work. I just keep on looking over that way, just make sure there's nobody coming in or that needs help or anything like that. So if being a witch is about spells, then why is it against the Rede to curse and hex? And I want to say that with looking at the Rede, that can also be taken, and is taken by many Wiccans, to be that you don't do harm unless it is in self-defense or in defense of your family or, your way of life. If somebody hits you, don't just like sit there and take it, but don't go out and do these curses and hexes just for the sake of doing them, just because you want to do harm. Don't be a sadist, is basically how I interpret the Wiccan Rede. Now, not being a Wiccan, that's how I would interpret it. As somebody who is Wiccan, might take it somewhat differently or entirely differently. So I think that is something that has to be taken from person to person and has to be judged on the individual's aspects or the individual's thought process of why they are doing what they are doing, the why behind what we do. as far as me, I don't really have a problem with cursing, hexing, binding, or any of that type of more negative type of spell work if it is entirely called for. I do have a problem with just doing it frivolously because I do believe that whatever I put out there will ripple back in some side effects. Everything has side effects, and your side effects may vary depending on what you do. So if I turn around and I curse somebody, or I hex them, or I bind them, I might get something that's not so favorable coming back towards me. So it's important to keep in mind that whenever you are doing this type of spell work, that you also protect yourself from any backlash whenever you are doing this spell work. So it's important to keep that in mind, that whatever you put out there might have a side effect that comes back at you. So I always stress to people to, think through your spell work before you do it. Don't frivolously do things just to do them. Don't be a sadist and cause pain on somebody that is not warranted. Another thing that I have to address with myself and with anybody that asks me, as is here, is whenever you're thinking about doing a hex, binding, cursing, anything like that, have you exhausted all other options? To me, hexing, binding, cursing is a last ditch effort to make things right. So if I haven't exhausted the talking to them to their face, or taking any legal actions that may need to have taken place, if I haven't exhausted all of those options, then why am I going with a spiritual option? Have I tried, if I do go the spiritual route, or energetic route in this case, if I do take that route, even early on, have I exhausted the more mundane type of spells, or I don't even want to say more mundane, it sounds fluffier, I guess. But have I tried the less aggressive approaches to making this thing happen? So let's say somebody owes me money. Before I go on cursing them because they haven't paid me back, have I done a spell work of, encouraging them to pay their debts? Have I done a spell work for my own financial gain of getting those bills paid to me, or getting those debts paid to me? Have I done those steps before I go out and just say, screw it, I'm cursing them? Have I taken those steps, and have I thought through this process of making sure that I have taken all necessary steps before just jumping into, before jumping into the cursing, hexing, binding, whatnot? And that's something that, where you say a priestess here blasted so many times that it got real and very real. And I would like to say that I don't know what that priestess's process was, if they just, off the cuff decided to curse people, or to hex them, or however they did whatever spell work that they did. Did they take those steps to make sure that, they, did a proportional response, or that they gradually upgraded their response to eventually be cursing or hexing, binding, whatever, the other individual? If they didn't, then I would call into question if this priestess was actually, good at the way that they emulated and took on the mantle of priestess. I would call that into question if I were a part of that coven. So these are things that go through my mind whenever I'm thinking of spell work, is if I were to curse this person, or if I were to cast something against this person at all, it doesn't even have to be a curse, it could be anything. If I cast anything towards this person that can be negative, that could negatively impact them in any way, have I exhausted all other options that won't affect them at all, or that is not directly geared towards this individual? Have I exhausted all those options? If I have exhausted those options, then we then go up another tier and say, okay, we're kicking it up a notch. And at that point, targeting in on that person in, specifically. If something little doesn't catch their attention and they don't straighten up, then you escalate from there on. So as far as the Wiccan Rede, not Wiccan, but I do try to keep that in mind in whenever I am doing any spell work, or whenever I'm formulating spell work in my brain thing, trying to think of what I'm doing next. This is the process that it goes through, or at least that my brain thing goes through. So yes, to Blessed and Blast. If being a witch is about spells, then why is it against the Rede? Again, I addressed that. Crowley did blast. Again, probably not the best example out there for somebody who is pagan in any way. Probably not the best example. He did not have the best reputation. He wasn't the best person. Now, I will say some of his teachings are phenomenal. He did what he did, and he did it well, but the ethics behind it, not always a shining example in my eyes. Let's be honest. Again, you can say the same thing about Gerald Gardner, not exactly the best example for everything that he did. You can say it about the Farrars and so on and so forth. Not every person out there is the best example for everything. Now, do I think that makes them a bad teacher overall? No. Do I think there's room for improvement, or that there was room for improvement? Absolutely. Were they also a product of their time? Probably. And that's another thing that I want to address in this, is that things progress in time and, socially. Right now we're seeing more progression in civil liberties within the Black community. Now, we're seeing that, and if we hold on to old beliefs and count those as absolute fact, and that things shouldn't change, like some evangelical Christians believe, then I think we only stunt our own growth as human beings in a social environment. So I think we actually hold ourselves back in keeping to old ways that are antiquated. So I do want to stress that just because back in the day, back in the 1600s, just because you could curse somebody and it was common practice to do so, again, pulling stuff out of my butt over here, just because you could do it back then and it was, commonplace, doesn't mean that it is necessarily a good thing to do and that it should still be done today. Just because we could own people back in the 1800s doesn't mean it was a good thing to do, and doesn't mean that's something that we should do today. So I think that not only do we need to progress socially and within our own circles of beliefs of humanity, but we should also evolve in our spiritual discussions and our spiritual beliefs. And you can see some of that with the activism that goes on within the pagan community. So I'm not saying that we are stunted by that, but I think that if we continue to look on the side of, just curse away as you will, then I think we kind of stunt ourselves in the thinking of alternative ways of getting things done, which, can happen. So I think I've made my point. I think I've rambled on long enough. So I also think that this is the last video for this month. So I will see you next month. Until then, may you have love, hugs, and ladybugs. Bye-bye.